Et si nous devions donner la date à laquelle des études d'architecture de paysage ont été commencées en Lituanie, ce ne serait que 1972, quand le programme d'études d'architecture de paysage avait démarré à l'Académie des Beaux-Arts. Mais quand même, le paysage culturel témoigne de l'émergence de cette profession qui s'est affirmée dans la recherche d'une harmonie entre la nature et la construction que nous pouvons d'ailleurs observer depuis longtemps. Et l'architecte paysagiste contemporain doit apprendre à gérer cet héritage. L'histoire du paysage fait partie des cultures entières du pays. Par exemple, le paysage à l'époque du Grand-Duché de Lituanie s'est formé sur un territoire beaucoup plus vaste qu'il n'est plus actuellement en Lituanie. Beaucoup du patrimoine de cette période se trouve maintenant en Pologne, en Biélorussie ou en Ukraine. Il est très important, à mon avis, de toute façon, de fournir aux étudiants des connaissances sur le patrimoine paysager lituanien qui se trouve actuellement en dehors de la Lituanie. La diffusion des styles de l'art Renaissance et baroque d'Europe occidentale a été déterminée par l'établissement de la résidence du roi de Pologne et du Grand-Duché de Lituanie en Vilnius. Les liens étroits avec l'Italie sont établis depuis longtemps. Mais la plupart des jardins de cette époque ont disparu. Et il est nécessaire d'approfondir les recherches sur le patrimoine paysager lituanien de cette période. Sciences naturelles favorisent le développement paysager, c'est clair. La République des deux nations a développé sa vie économique, politique et culturelle de façon européenne. L'université de Vilnius a été créée en 1579. La chaire d'histoire naturelle et le jardin botanique dirigé par le botaniste professeur français Jean-Emmanuel Gilbert ont pris place dans l'université de Vilnius en 1781. Des savants naturalistes successeurs de Gilbert continuaient ce travail dans le domaine des sciences relevantes de l'histoire naturelle et de l'art des jardins. Par exemple, le professeur des sciences naturelles, Stanislas Boniface Junzil, a replacé le jardin botanique de Vilnius au bord de la rivière Vilna dans l'ancien jardin de Bernardin. Junzil a dessiné les jardins des manoirs et de ses collègues et a publié des ouvrages importants sur la botanique appliquée. Il est important de mentionner que dans son rapport sur les caractéristiques de l'art des jardins, à propos des qualités requises dans l'art du jardinage, en 1809, il a proposé de relier les espaces du jardin au paysage des alentours et de tenir compte des conditions d'origine des plantations du parc. En même période, à partir de la fin du XVIIIe siècle, les programmes d'études appliquées dans les domaines des beaux-arts sont présents à l'université de Vilnius. Le nouveau programme d'architecture est créé par un célèbre architecte lituanien, Laurynas Gucevičius, représentant du courant du classicisme. Avant de devenir le professeur de l'université de Vilnius, il a fait voyage en Europe occidentale où il avait écouté des conférences sur l'architecture étudiées en Italie et en France. Ses connaissances en architecture avaient été associées avec des savoir-faire en paysage aussi. En tant que professeur d'architecture, il avait collaboré théoriquement et pratiquement avec des professeurs de la chaire d'histoire naturelle. La naissance de l'architecture des paysages en Lituanie en début du XIXe siècle se manifeste non seulement dans la création de parcs romantiques, mais aussi dans leur description professionnelle. La duchesse Isabella Czartoryska et la duchesse Elena Radziwiłłowa se sont occupées des jardins de leur manoir de Puławy et Arcadia. Aujourd'hui, c'est en Pologne. Et y ont créé les jardins romantiques. Les impressions sur ces jardins figurent dans le poème de Jacques Delisle, Les Jardins, et aussi dans l'ouvrage d'Arthur Manga, paru en 1867. Édouard André, dans son traité L'art des jardins, exprime son admiration pour ces parcs. Elena Redzvilova, en 1800, a publié à Berlin une brochure en français sur son parc Arcadia. Isabella Czertorycka, en 1805, a publié un livre sur son jardin aimé, Pensées différentes sur la manière d'aménager les jardins. Ce livre a été, pendant tout le 19e siècle, le vade-mecum pour les propriétaires des manoirs. Les manuels pour la création des parcs et des jardins ont joué le rôle important dans la formation de culture paysagère. L'ouvrage réédité à cette reprise au Groden Polnocne en français Les jardins nordiques a été écrit et édité à Vilnius par Joseph Strumila en 1820. La troisième édition de ce livre traite les jardins d'agrément. La dernière décision apparaît après la mort de l'auteur, présente un regard plus vaste sur le jardin et sa structure. Les principes de la création des parcs sont également présentés dans le manuel du professeur d'architecture à l'université de Vilnius, Karol Pocieszynski. Il s'appelle Base de l'architecture pour la jeunesse académique et est paru en 1856. À la fin du XIXe siècle, l'architecte paysagiste français Édouard André et les collaborateurs de son agence sont venus en Lituanie pour dessiner les parcs de Comte Tiškevič, 3 parcs situés près de Vilnius et un autre à Palanga, au bord de la mer du Baltique. Son fils René André et paysagiste belge Jules Bussin ont travaillé avec cette équipe en Lituanie aussi. Ces interventions influenceront longtemps les pensées et conceptions du paysagisme dans notre pays, et leur impact artistique et éducatif reste immense et très important pour les Lituaniens paysagistes jusqu'à maintenant. Dans le revue horticole de 1906, René André avait présenté les détails de la réalisation du projet du parc Palanga. Cet article continue d'être une source d'informations authentiques et éducatives pour nous maintenant. L'indépendance de la Lituanie est proclamée en 1918. À cause du conflit avec la Pologne entre les 2 guerres mondiales, la ville Kaunas devient la capitale temporaire lituanienne et connaît une croissance et développement importants. L'ancienne capitale Vilnius reste sous le régime de la Pologne et se développe selon les projets d'architectes polonais. L'architecture entre les 2 guerres est influencée par les écoles de France, car les architectes et les urbanistes en charge des projets sont formés dans les écoles d'architecture françaises. Le schéma directeur du développement de la ville de Kaunas, dressé en 1923 par les architectes urbanistes danois Peter Marius Fransen et l'architecte lituanien Antanas Jokimas, présente déjà les caractéristiques de l'architecture de paysage, des éléments des espaces verts urbains, en particulier dans le schéma de planification du quartier Žaliakalnis, que vous voyez sur l'écran, qui était situé sur les anciens terrains militaires. Plus tardivement, les jeunes architectes et urbanistes, élèves de grandes écoles d'architecture et urbanisme françaises, en particulier Janusz Tlomakowski à Vilnius et Jonas Kowalski-Kova à Kaunas, dans les années 1930, semblent s'être approchés au concept des cités-jardins. À la fin des années 1930, l'université de Kaunas ainsi que l'école des arts appliqués à Kaunas ont mis en place les études de planification des espaces verts. À la période soviétique, la profession du paysagiste répond aux tendances générales du développement urbain. L'État investit dans un vaste programme d'urbanisation. Les espaces verts plantés comme les îlots de verdure monofonctionnels ont eu leur place dans les schémas directeurs, mais leur croissance est plus lente que celle de villes et de villages qui connaissent industrialisation galopante. En 1951, l'Université de Kaunas a été réorganisée et ses facultés techniques sont réunies dans l'Institut polytechnique de Kaunas. Dans l'université, on enseigné l'architecture, la construction et la planification territoriale. En 1970, une nouvelle école supérieure attachée à l'Institut technique de construction de Vilnius, maintenant c'est actuelle l'Université technique de Vilnius, a été créée avec une faculté architecture où l'architecture du paysage a été longtemps intégrée à un programme d'architecture comme discipline supplémentaire. En 1972, le programme d'études en architecture des paysages démarre à l'Académie des Beaux-Arts de Vilnius. Les architectes appliquent les principes de l'architecture paysage aux solutions urbaines. Par exemple, ici vous voyez sur l'écran, lors de la création du grand ensemble de l'Esdine à Vilnius, les auteurs ont proposé de préserver la topographie du relief existant, de créer ainsi une silhouette plus diversifiée de ce quartier et aussi les espaces verts entre les bâtiments. Aujourd'hui, le paradigme de l'urbanisme écologique favorise le développement des villes vertes en verdure et pose des défis pour la formation des architectes paysagistes. La trame verte et bleue dans les villes est considérée comme une particularité et une priorité dans un processus de développement des villes. Le rôle écologique des espaces verts commence à être pris en compte dans les projets urbains au même titre que leurs fonctions sociales, économiques et artistiques. Cela crée un besoin pour les compétences d'un architecte paysagiste et implique les obligations pour cette profession et pour les programmes d'études. Le contexte juridique n'est pas assez propice au métier d'architecte paysagiste encore en Lituanie. L'architecture de paysage dans la classification nationale type de profession est présentée comme une profession autonome qui correspond à la classification internationale. Dans la classification des études supérieures, l'architecture des paysages est intégrée au domaine des études artistiques, direction de l'architecture. Dans cette loi des espaces verts, les études d'architecture, l'architecture du paysage ont mentionné entre les autres professions concernées. Cette loi envisage la régulation du champ de l'activité de la profession d'architecte paysagiste. Le projet d'espace vert public doit être géré par des personnes titulaires du certificat de gestionnaire de projet des espaces verts. Et ce certificat est contrôlé par le ministère d'Environnement. Comme vous voyez, aujourd'hui, il y a 50 ans pour les programmes d'études en architecture des paysages en Lituanie. La formation, comme j'ai mentionné déjà, la formation des architectes paysagistes s'est réalisée en 1972 avec un programme d'architecture Académie des Beaux-Arts. Mais en 2007, l'Académie des Beaux-Arts de Vilnius abandonne son programme de master d'architecture de paysage parce que le programme ne répondait plus aux exigences du Centre d'évaluation et de la qualité d'enseignement supérieur. À Klaipėda, l'Université de Klaipėda, les programmes d'architecture des paysages, licence et master, mis en place en 1991, ont été fermés en 2015 lors de la restructuration de l'université. En 2015, le programme de design de paysage est créé, licence 400, à l'Académie d'agriculture. Les matières enseignées dans ce programme sont axées sur les compétences en architecture de paysage et permettent d'obtenir une licence en sciences agricoles. À l'Université technique de Vilnius, le nouveau programme pour la formation d'architectes paysagistes du premier cycle, licence en 3 ans, avait été lancé en 2020. La première promotion des architectes paysagistes a commencé ses études en 2021. C'est à cause du Covid, etc. Le nouveau programme de licence en architecture des paysages à l'Université technique a été mis en place grâce au projet européen EULANT 21. Les universités d'Estonie, de Pologne, d'Hongrie, des Pays-Bas, de Lituanie et IFLA Europe sont les partenaires de ce projet. Les résultats du projet seront intégrés aussi dans les directives éducatives existantes au niveau européen. Les domaines clés de connaissances et d'expertise dans ce programme sont regroupés selon les aspects de l'architecture des paysages qui abordent théorie, processus, catégories de projets, matériaux, outils et pratiques. Pour chaque compétence de base, une ligne d'apprentissage est définie. Les lignes ou modules d'apprentissage dont le système européen de transfert d'accumulation des crédits, etc. connu pour le premier cycle d'enseignement, licence en architecture des paysages. Le programme envisage également la participation des étudiants à la recherche menée à l'université et dans les autres établissements scientifiques. Le second projet Erasmus plus in Hollande a été lancé en 2020 sous la direction de l'Université technique et avec participation des autres universités européennes et ainsi IFLA Europe. Ce projet envisage la plateforme transeuropéenne d'apprentissage en architecture des paysages au niveau du master. Le projet in Hollande doit être finalisé cette année. Voilà quelques images de nos étudiants à l'université. La vie, elle est non seulement dans les salles. À partir de 2021, la première promotion du premier cycle d'enseignement en architecture des paysages a commencé avec 5 étudiants. Ok, c'est conclusion. L'architecte paysagiste contemporain doit apprendre à travailler dans les différents contextes historiques, morphologiques et culturels. Il est nécessaire de fournir aux étudiants le sentiment du respect et de la responsabilité pour tout cet héritage. L'analyse a montré que le besoin des compétences en architecture du paysage dépend de la compréhension des clients privés, du public, des politiques et des professionnels de l'aménagement urbain. En outre terme, la connaissance de l'importance des compétences en architecture paysagère doit être diffusée dans la société et inscrite dans la loi. La transition des champs internationaux pour acquérir les meilleures connaissances en matière de création d'espaces verts découle d'une évolution historique. Cette tradition de coopération internationale se poursuit et devrait être continuée. Et c'est mon avis, ces dernières conclusions. Aujourd'hui, nous avons 2 programmes d'études du paysage dans les écoles différentes qui communiquent peu. Il est important de créer une école nationale d'architecture du paysage forte, non pas tant sur le plan administratif que sur le plan du partage des connaissances et des savoir-faire. Merci pour votre attention.
Merci. Nous continuons avec la communication de Lake Douglas, qui va nous parler de la formation d'architecte paysagiste à l'université de l'État de Louisiana. Merci.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. My presentation today is about the birth and evolution of the landscape architecture program at Louisiana State University. today one of the leading programs in America. Landscape architects Dan Kiley, James Rose, Garrett Ekbo, and their colleagues, seen here, had a profound impact on the evolution of the theory and practice of American landscape architecture. A little-known example of their influence on the academic profession is in the program at Louisiana State University and the long association they had with its founder, Dr. Robert S. Reich. American landscape architecture begins with Frederick Law Olmsted and his lengthy practice. The senior Olmsted's office was where many first and second generation landscape architects apprenticed and worked. Up until then, academic training did not exist, and most professionals came from educational backgrounds or work experience in agriculture, civil engineering, or related fields. In the 1890s, the elder Olmsted's stepson and son, John Charles and Frederick Jr., succeeded their father in practice. And in 1900, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. inaugurated the first professional program, leading to a degree in landscape architecture at Harvard University. In short, the influence of the Olmsteds, father, stepson, and son, on the definition, content, practice, and pedagogy of landscape architecture in America was pervasive for decades, and their legacy remains today. 10 academic programs were established in America between 1900 and 1910, and by the 1920s, 2 pedagogic patterns were well established. First were programs that grew from agricultural or horticultural origins, such as Cornell, and second, programs such as Harvard's, which was a graduate program, that followed Beaux-Arts design theories and principles influenced by European examples from the Renaissance to the late 19th century. By the end of the 1920s, the profession was established with second and third generation landscape architects, as were about 20 academic programs. During the Depression of the 1930s, landscape architects turned away from estate design, which had primarily been the focus of professional practice, into areas such as transportation infrastructure, subdivision development, and public works projects, municipal parks, recreation facilities. But due to limited job opportunities, enrollment in academic programs was not particularly robust, and academic growth was slow. 3 students who were in Harvard's program in the mid-30s, James Rose and Garrett Ekbo, seen here, and Dan Kiley, became frustrated with the curriculum's reliance on Beaux-Arts traditions. They were excited instead by new Bauhaus design theories, artists, and architects such as Walter Gropius. They rebelled against the notion that there were only right solutions based on Beaux-Arts principles, and everything else was wrong. Kiley left without graduating and started a practice in New England. Rose was expelled for his oppositional attitudes. Ekbo graduated and opened a practice in California with his brother-in-law, Edward Williams, and later Robert Royston and Francis Dean. These men and their contemporaries defined the profession and the academy from the 1940s on, and with regard to the evolution of American landscape architecture theory, practice, education, and professional advancement, their significance cannot be overestimated. After World War II, the country's economy expanded, and with ensuing prosperity, the country's middle class grew. Young families moved into detached, single-family housing in newly built suburbs and created demands for domestic features and conveniences that became defining features of what's called the American dream. A central part of this new middle-class lifestyle was the reorganization of domestic spaces, now known as the mid-century modern architectural vocabulary. Horizontal organization, expanses of glass, automobile accommodations, flexible interior rooms, the integration of indoor and outdoor spaces, and exterior living spaces, often with swimming pools for informal entertaining. This has become known as the California School of Landscape Architecture. It was not a school in terms of academic program. Its principles were in opposition to the organizational formality of Beaux-Arts design principles and aligned instead with emerging design theories rooted in the Bauhaus. Both Rose and Ekbo had published their design theories in the late 30s and early 40s in the architecture press, but in the architecture press, not in popular publications. In 1950, Ekbo's Design for Living appeared, and Rose's Creative Gardens followed in 1958. Both depicted California school designs. They reached wide audiences in America and became standards of domestic garden design. Rose practiced in New Jersey. Ekbo had an office in Los Angeles and taught at the University of Southern California. Here are some examples of Ekbo's early work. Note the distinctive representation style. LSU's program had its origin with the arrival of Dr. Robert Reich, known as Doc, to LSU in Baton Rouge in 1941 to teach horticulture in the School of Agriculture. With a new PhD in horticulture from Cornell, Reich was in the class the day after he arrived in Baton Rouge. Returning from military service in 1945, he taught in the Department of Horticulture, intending eventually to develop an independent landscape architecture program. He was discouraged by the slow progress. Quote, "Nobody at the university knew what landscape architecture was," he wrote, "and very few cared." Furthermore, Reich noticed the profession's pedagogy in America and resulting student work involved, quote, "design by copying or adapting designs from books and other sources, or just making pretty designs and putting them on a board." Reich got a copy of Ekbo's recently published Landscape for Living. He wrote Ekbo and asked if he could come to Ekbo's Los Angeles office for a 6-month sabbatical in the late 1950s and early 1951. Ekbo agreed, and Reich, now married with 2 small children, worked in Ekbo's office and assisted Ekbo in teaching. This was the beginning of a 50-year personal, professional, and academic relationship. In his 2007 memoir, Reich noted how impressed he was with Ekbo's philosophy and how it was, he said, "the shot in the arm that charged me up. I decided to come back to LSU and build a superior program in landscape architecture based on the experience with Ekbo." This is what he brought back to LSU. First, a knowledge about how an office operated, dealing with clients and managing a project. Second, that landscape architecture is really a fine art, and the important influence of contemporary artists in terms of spatial relationships, forms, and compositions. Third, the value of having a design process. Design should be a product of the site's unique circumstances, not a replication of a previous design. Fourth, the exposure to post-World War II California school projects, professionals, and the merger of architecture and landscape. Fifth, the symbiotic relationship between an academic program and working professionals through curriculum development, office practice, and internships. Sixth, the professional licensure is equal to professional credibility. 7, the value of travel and exposure to different cultures, communities, projects, and people. And finally, the importance of connecting with other professionals through the profession's national organization, the American Society of Landscape Architects. The Ekbo experience proved invaluable in setting a direction for professional education in LSU, as well as for advancing the profession in Louisiana. In the 1950s, there was only one landscape architect in Louisiana. Like Reich, he was a Cornell graduate, but he showed in fact, no interest in being involved in LSU's program. In fact, he said there was room in Louisiana for only one landscape architect, and he was it. Reich realized that if he were to succeed and if the profession were to advance, he would have to do it himself. In Ekbo's office, Reich picked up some hints about illustrating work, as suggested by the cover of this book, self-published book, Landscape and You from 1953. This was a manual written for the general public as well as for, quote, the college student beginning in the field, end quote. In addition to being a student text, the book served another strategic purpose by connecting Reich with garden clubs, community organizations, and public programs that featured landscape architects. He realized that, quote, education of the general public concerning the profession and its significance is of critical importance. Without informed clients and enlightened consumers, the profession could not reach its potential, end quote. Over time, Reich established connections with other academic programs, professional leaders, and offices in America, usually with a telephone call. He began sending graduates to professional offices throughout the country and steered those he thought were potential educators to Harvard for a master's degree. Regardless of career path, graduates were well prepared, and as a result, Reich became a respected leader in the profession's academic wing. Student welfare was always a priority, and this interest continued into maintaining personal contacts with alumni. Reich's relationships with other professionals and his knowledge of where alumni worked led to a curriculum characteristic for which the program is noted: travel. Early on, Reich realized that most of his students were from Louisiana and had not traveled beyond the state's boundaries, and in the late 1960s, he instigated week-long, low-cost field trips to the east and west coasts of America to see projects, visit offices, and meet alumni. An undated note in Reich's files gives the value of student field trips: its exposure to the real world, its opportunities to have discussions with practitioners, it's the realization that what is being given to them in the classroom is actually what applies in practice. It's the excitement and enthusiasm for the profession, it's inspiration, and it generates a desire for more travel. Reich often went on these trips, enabling him to renew acquaintances with alumni and professionals and see office work. Later, these trips expanded to Europe, Central and South America, and Asia. Travel continues to be integral to the curriculum, and now design studios have required field trips associated with studio topics. These are images from recent student field trips. Beginning in 1947, Reich led efforts to present a public summer festival of art on the LSU campus that featured lectures and performances in the areas of music, drama, fine arts, dance, and design, including landscape and architecture. From newspaper accounts and surviving programs, one of which is seen here, we know that the early participants were Rose in 1948, Kiley in 1949, Ekbo in 1950, Royston and Williams in 1952. Throughout this series, speakers were a who's who of post-World War II professionals in the areas of design practice, education, journalism, and performing arts. In 1950s Louisiana, there weren't very many clients who embraced the contemporary indoor-outdoor orientation of post-World War II California lifestyle. However, Ekbo's approach to domestic landscapes, as well as that of his contemporary and for a time his partner, Robert Royston, were well suited to the New Orleans residences designed by several young Tulane architecture faculty, whose modernist designs reinterpreted local building typologies. Royston designed 2 gardens in New Orleans for one client, the first of which is seen here from the mid-50s, and the second in the 1960s. Both gardens remain more or less intact. Royston spoke in New Orleans on several occasions, and he remained in contact with LSU's program well into the 1980s through hosting students in his Los Angeles office on annual West Coast field trips. While in the 1960s, public recognition of the profession lagged far behind acceptance of contemporary architecture, By the early 1970s, LSU's program was flourishing with a robust enrollment and graduates who had worked elsewhere and returned to Louisiana to open new practices, first in New Orleans and later throughout the state. Projects from local professionals gained attention and national recognition from professionals in design publications. By then, this is the 1970s, the profession in the academy as well as in practice had become well established, and it is hard to imagine how any of this could have happened without the leadership and guidance of Dr. Reich. In 1983, at age 70, Reich officially retired as a member of the faculty, but he remained actively involved in academic and professional activities, such as leading a seminar, planning field trips, attending faculty meetings and professional meetings, and advising, but only when asked. In 2007, the program was named the Robert Reich School of Landscape Architecture in his honor. Reich continued to lead a popular seminar that brought alumni to campus to talk about professional opportunities, personal career trajectories, and how lessons learned in the program and outside of the classroom provided a sound career foundation. Reich was still leading his seminar during the spring semester of 2010 before he died that summer at age 97. In his 2007 memoir, Reich articulated his philosophy for the program, connecting it to the philosophy he and his wife adopted in rearing 4 children. Quote, letting each child develop his or her own qualities and characteristics in general, not telling them what to do or how to do things except upon their request. We apply somewhat the same system to teaching landscape architecture. The teacher should try to find and emphasize some good aspects of every student project and then make suggestions for ways for improving it. By stressing the good, the teacher gives encouragement and helps develop self-confidence, end quote. This nurturing approach remains. Alumni recall its positive impact on their lives and being a significant part of their professional development. In conclusion, the relationship between LSU's program and modernists Kiley, Rose, Ekbo, and their contemporaries is very clear. Influenced by them, Reich built a program based on the foundation of the following. First, primarily a concern for students. Second, connections with office practice and professionals. Third, an engaged and enthusiastic faculty. Fourth, a comprehensive curriculum. And fifth, cultural exposure through travel. The continued success of the program confirms the wisdom of this approach. Thank you.
Merci Laïc. Et c'est Albert qui intervient sur 125 ans de pratique paysagère à Budapest, en Hongrie. Merci.
Bonjour, madame and monsieur. Yeah, okay. This is all what I know in French, so please excuse me, I will speak in English. Yeah. In my presentation today, I propose a short overview of the landscape architecture education from Hungary, and I divided my presentation in 3 parts. Firstly, I would like to say a few words about to do a brief historical overview of the 20th century. Afterwards, a short presentation of the outstanding faculty, which is a period in between 1992 and nowadays. And finally, to point out some high importance focuses we consider in our education at the moment. The landscape architecture education in Hungary take place nowadays in frame of Hungarian University of Agriculture and Life Sciences. This is a university having 21 institutes, and one of these institutes is the Institute of Landscape Architecture, Urban Planning and Garden Art. As you can see in this slide, the institute has 7 departments. 4 of these departments are related mainly to design and planning, and 3 of the departments are related to some basic issues and to research. At the moment we have 667 students and a staff composed by 60 teachers, and of course we always consider important to involve some external experts also in the education, and we used to have it in between 15-20 persons each year. Looking at the time evolution of the institute, we can observe from the beginning that the education has an agricultural root in Hungary, and the real beginning of the landscape education we consider at the moment started at the end of 19th century, actually in 1896, when some specific subjects related to garden design were introduced in the curricula. Actually, the most important developments or improvements of the education are linked to some renowned and recognized personalities of Hungarian landscape architecture. I am talking about 3 professors, Reich, Ormos and Mőcsényi. And beside this, undoubtedly the most important moment, we consider the year 1992, when the outstanding faculty of landscape architecture has been established. A few words about Reich, who was the first leader personality of landscape education in Hungary. He was an architect, a famous architect in the beginning of the 20th century, and his portfolio with some new technical and design-based subjects like garden design, garden construction, architecture, topography, and he introduced even some terminus technicus in Hungarian professional language, like geometrical garden, scenic garden, or even the landscape architecture as notion. So some terminus technicus which are in use even nowadays. He led already in the 1920s research activities in landscape architecture related to positive social and well-being effects of greeneries in the city. In design, he follows the arts and crafts and Jugendstil principles, and his architectural vision and approach gave a first interdisciplinary character to the education. The second personality is Imre Ormos. After Reich passed away suddenly in 1932, he was replaced by Ormos, a young landscape architect called home from Germany, who despite of his young age had at that time already an international experience and good reputation. and is his merit. At the time it was the first complex discipline dealing with landscape design. It was a real design studio at that time. 1956, and titular the program, the school founder, but as a researcher and as designer as well, being probably the most important personality of Hungarian landscape architecture in the first part of the 20th century. This is a short, a brief overview. A diagram prepared by Barbara Birli from Vienna, who researched in her PhD the evolution of the landscape education in Europe, and the graphic put in a time context the establishment of the first outstanding program in Hungary, as you can see here in the 1960s, when the existing programs were in between 10 and 20 in a European context, and the new programs launched in that decade in between 20 and 30. And Mőcsényi finally, after almost retirement, he became the leader of the landscape education, and as portfolio improvement he worked out the two-tier educational system in 1979. 30 years later on everywhere in Europe. He established in 1992 the outstanding faculty of landscape architecture. At that time he was the rector of the university. It was easy for him. Yeah. And he gave a new definition of the landscape. In 1968, he defined the landscape as a cultural product and a humanized nature, and this is very similar. We can read nowadays in the definition of the landscape from a European Landscape Convention. He played a very important role in the internationalization of Hungarian landscape architecture, being for long years vice president of and afterwards president of International Federation of Landscape Architects, and organizing the IFLA conference in Hungary in 1984. His international contribution to the development of landscape education was recognized through ECLA's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2009 and through IFLA Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe Award in 2012. And now let me to point out a few details related to the education at the time of the independent faculty. A few crucial data are marked in the table, and I would like to highlight especially here the explosive increase of the students' number in the second part of the 1990s. As you can see, from starting with 25 students per class, and achieving finally almost 100 students per class per year. The apparition of different specializations, thank you. The establishment of some new programs beside classical landscape architecture. In 2004, the urban planner program. Afterwards, in 2006, the bachelor in landscape management and garden construction. Later in 2009, the Master of Arts in Landscape Architecture and Garden Art, which has been launched in 2013 in its English version also, which is an international program running nowadays as well with 20-25 students per year. Summing up the educational programs belonging to the Institute of Landscape Architecture and Urban Planning and Garden Art, I can say that we are proud that we teach at all levels, at undergraduate level, at master level, and we have even a doctoral school of landscape architecture and landscape ecology. And on bachelor level, we have one program with 3 specializations, as you can see. On master level, we have 3 master programs, one in Hungarian and English as well, and as I told you, the doctoral program too. In this context, I mentioned the number of 667 students per year, without to count the doctoral students, the PhD students, which are approximately, I don't know exactly the number, but which are in between 50 and 60 altogether at the moment. Just an insight, in the structure of the Master of Arts in Landscape Architecture is organized in 4 semesters. The first semester is focusing on open space design mainly. The second one is about landscape heritage. The third one is about large-scale planning, landscape and regional planning. And in the last one, we used to ask the students to prepare their diploma thesis, of course. And here you can see even a list of countries where are represented or which were represented in the last 10 years by their students in this MLA program. Finally, I would like to point out some, from our point of view, interesting aspects of our education we consider crucial in the preparation of landscape architects. First of all, the visual communication, perception, creativity, which is an issue we are going to deal with from the beginning till the end. Actually, it's not related to 1 year or to one subject. We try to manage it as comprehensive as possible. For example, there is a terrain art workshop which we used to do at the beginning of the studies, which help the students exploring, understanding, and representing landscapes by drawing and modeling with empirical observations. Exercises are related to representation of toponyms of students' native landscapes, and they need to draw elevation, contour lines, sections, and based on those to prepare a very simple clay models in a short time. You can see here some montages prepared in Photoshop, and those exercises with sketches, text, memories helps the students to identify the different steps of the observation, abstraction, and sketching activities, which represents basic design skills. Another example to observe, which I've learned actually from Katarina Santo, sitting in this room, how to observe, to perceive, and how to interpret the landscape in a graphical way in order to have a complex and comprehensive image about the multiple effects and contents of a garden or landscape, which afterwards should be enhanced during the design processes. This is a task did by a student related to the Esterházy Castle Garden from Hungary. This is the biggest Baroque garden in Hungary, and I asked them, I mean the students, to use the routes considered by themselves the most interesting and to represent graphically their garden experiences during their walk in the garden. The comprehensive pedagogical approach in all design education is the principle of learning by doing, good execution and building skills are basic expectation in case of our bachelor students, especially. And to support those skills, we are organizing a 2-semester long course. The first part is called Build Structures in the Garden, and the second part, Execution Exercises. And during these 2 semesters, they should to finish the most important build garden features, simple things like small pavement, small retaining walls, fences, stairs, pergolas, achieving some basic experience in building real garden objects, using real materials and real tools, and having a feeling of success at the end of their work. And the motivation and the quality of their works is proved, for instance, by this small garden built by our students on a competition which is organized year by year. Last year was organized in Austria, in Graz, where they obtained the first prize in this competition under the students. Another example related to learning by doing. This is a program launched by the university years ago, and this is about the renewal of vernacular baths at a level that can be accomplished with local internal resources and a little external help, of course. This is a typical example of participatory landscape design and execution, being used complex knowledges of water management as well. Thank you. The renewal of such baths is characterized by sensitive interventions that are adapted to the site and respectful of nature and the environment, and technical detail planning and execution are part of the educational process as well. And of course the social impact is very important. We consider it is a kind of environmental education for the local people. Fieldwork, I don't want to tell more about this because in the previous presentation we already learned the importance of the site visits and excursions from Mr. Douglas, and the design by research, which is actually the basic activity we are trying to do at the university. The design studio mimics the daily work in an office or design department in an institution. A few conclusions. I think the most important is that we have to follow our ancestor examples from one hand, from other hand to be flexible and open to new ideas, ways and approaches, because as we know, the landscape evolution, or maybe it's better to say landscape transformation, became more and more dynamic, and we have to be able to prepare the new generations of professionals to manage these new challenges. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci. Nous avons une quinzaine de minutes, mais peut-être un peu plus, pour échanger avec tous nos intervenants. Merci beaucoup des interventions très riches, stimulantes, qui confirment encore une fois l'internationalité des formations. Calzolari qui va étudier aux États-Unis, les architectes et les experts français qui viennent pour l'université à Lituanie. Et voilà, donc il y a plein de questions qui se présentent, mais je donne la parole à la salle si vous en avez déjà qui peuvent émerger. Il doit y avoir un micro qui circule. Oui.
I can try in English. This is a question for Albert Fekete. I think we are many here to be interested by research by design. You concluded about talking about this. Could you tell us a few words about how you practice this in the school, please?
May I answer? No? Thank you. I will try to say a few words. So maybe the best way to explain that is to tell you a concrete example we are doing with the students. There are the university being located in Budapest. In the last 20 years, let's say, there are many new implemented projects, mainly open space design projects in Budapest. And doing this design by research, it means that in the first step, we are choosing a location. The students are researching their past. Afterwards, they take a contact with the design office who did that design a few years ago. I mean the last renewable design. Afterwards, they are going out, they survey the site, they analyze the site, they evaluate the site, and they, in case of sites which were renewed, let's say 5-10 years ago, they even do a new proposal, a concept to redesign that. So this would be a scheme, what we call design by research.
S'il vous plaît, présentez-vous quand vous posez la question, de sorte à ce qu'on puisse repérer vos...
Karine Els, et c'est pour Maria Teresa Parpagliado, non so come si pronuncia.
Parpagliolo.
Ah, scusa. Ça concerne votre conclusion à la fin. Vous avez dit 16 ans d'une formation, mais pas une reconnaissance de la discipline. Et qu'est-ce qu'on pourrait faire pour aider? Parce que vous nous avez montré votre longue histoire d'une formation de paysagiste. Elle est aussi historique, elle est ancrée dans votre pays. Mais que faire alors pour aider, puisque vous aviez dit il y a certains qui sont sceptiques, c'est le terme que vous avez utilisé. Comment aider alors cette formation pour que ça soit une discipline indépendante? Posso anche dirlo in italiano se vuole.
Come vuole.
Allora, lo dico di nuovo.
Ok, grazie.
Ah, en anglais. So in English.
Yes.
So how can we help the education of landscape architecture in Italy? You have a long background. She said before there were people who were skeptical. So how can we help you? IAP is part of IFLA Europe and the large landscape family in Europe. So what is your point of view? How can we help so that this education becomes an independent discipline?
Well, we need help. So this is clear that we need help. And first we have to fix why we need help. I think it's because we started late. to be an independent discipline, even if we have these important pioneers like Porcinai, like Maria Teresa Parpaiolo, like Calzolari. But I think that this connection between urbanism and landscape avoid us to be an independent discipline, and actually trying to highlight the importance of design, the importance of being proactive, be propositive, not just being interested in the safeguard of our landscape. That's the problem, that in Italy, landscape discipline was anchored first to landscape urbanism, and then to the need to safeguard an historic landscape. And that prevents us to be proactive, to be propositive, to be more linked to design. Actually, we are trying to join more the discipline of architecture and composition. This is something new for us. And that's what we are trying to do. Actually, landscape discipline and landscape teaching are autonomous. We have many courses and also some PhD programs. So we are working in a good way, but the numbers are still not so great as we wanted. So we need help, and this help should only be cultural. We have to make a change in the way we see to landscape. It's not just something we have to protect. To protect, we need to enhance our historic landscape and also to transform it, because history needs design and proactive behaviors. That's what we think.
Just adding to this, is it still the case that architects are sort of blocking membership in Italy, or that the architectural lobby is sort of keeping the landscape scene out of their chambers and things like this? I remember that professor from Genova, I forgot her name now.
Mazzino?
Sì.
Maybe
Valeria Mazzini.
No?
Mazzino, sì.
Yes.
She spoke about it at an ECLAS conference, that it's also an issue of getting the title registered, that the architecture chamber is not really accepting landscape architects.
Yes.
Maybe that's also something where there can be some help if there's more international exchange, showing presence of the profession internationally, and showing there's a tradition and an independence.
This should be very important. Actually, we have a struggle with the architect chamber, because they are also trying to erase completely the name landscape architect. We are just architect, and we are because we are an old generation, and so we are architect, but actually we have a lot of people graduate in landscape architecture, and they are recognized, but they want to erase this difference. And this is something that we have to fight against. Maybe ECLAS, and actually I'm a member of the EXO of ECLAS. Maybe we have to do something for it, and we need all the help. Just to say that this is not so uncommon around the world and in Europe. Okay, thank you. You're not alone. I don't believe it. In America.
There's a remarkable similarity between the developments people have shown in the different schools. You could say an historical continuity between important people, inspirations, projects, I don't know what. My question is, in this continuity, how do the different people look upon the new challenges for landscape architecture, like climate change? How is that going to be implemented and developed in your 4 different cases?
Il faut être synthétique, oui, parce qu'on va essayer de pas.
Je pense que Denis elle traduit déjà, donc ça va. Non, la question, pour faire très bref, c'était, vous avez tous et toutes évoqué une lignée ou un héritage dans la pédagogie qui est liée à des personnes phares, et comment les défis d'aujourd'hui, donc changement climatique, perte de biodiversité, etc., s'inscrit dans cette lignée. Ce qui était peut-être hier.
Who wants to answer first? You want?
No, please.
Oh. So we are trying to make our students able to face these contemporary challenges, that is to say climate change, that is to say loss of biodiversity, public health, because we are just out maybe of this pandemic emergency, so public health is another important issues of for the future, and then social inclusion, and that's another problem, and landscape architects are called to face all these challenges, so we are going to prepare them. That means that we need more interdisciplinary courses, and that's what we are doing with this joint venture, with this agreement with the Faculty of Agronomy and Ecology. But this is another problem that goes in the direction we were telling before. That is to say that the more landscape architecture join with other disciplines like ecology and agronomy, and the more architects don't recognize us as architect. They say you are telling something which goes in other fields which are not architectural composition. They are worried about shapes, they are worried about aesthetic, and we are trying to offer much more challenges, which are global challenges. And so we are trying to transform ourselves, and this is a problem for this dialogue with architecture. At the same time, to answer at all to your question, I think this is something that we inherited from the past, because all the people we cited, our pioneers, our fathers, like Maria Teresa Parpaiolo and Calzolari, were very modern in this. They were trying to fight these ecological challenges also at the beginning of the 19th century, in the 20th century, and in the 50s. And so we think they were very modern, and we're trying to keep their memories. Okay, thank you.
Alors, c'est bon. En Lituanie, ça marche assez bien parce que on peut dire que ce paradigme, nouvel paradigme qui se forme à cause des défis de changement de climat, et notre public qui demande déjà des compétences de la part de tout le monde qui participe dans la construction, dans l'aménagement de la ville, et croit beaucoup aux architectes paysagistes. Mais même les architectes paysagistes, c'est comme moi je mentionnais, dans ma présentation que c'est aussi défi pour programme, pour faire forte, strong, cette professionnel, les compétences, donner les compétences pour qu'ils puissent répondre à cette question de la vie. Mais par contre, il y a des problèmes, comme j'ai mentionné, d'héritage au patrimoine, c'est de restauration, de travail avec patrimoine qu'on a, et tous les projets de restauration du patrimoine, souvent il est considéré comme qu'on traverse aux problèmes du climat, problèmes écologiques. Et ça, pour la Lituanie, je crois que c'est très important de voir accumuler les meilleures pratiques de partout. Comment gérer les moments quand il faut que nous croyons qu'il faudrait restaurer ou rénover, mais comment gérer ces patrimoines historiques avec les jardins historiques et en considérant aussi les défis d'écologie et climat. C'est un peu un problème étroit peut-être, mais il faut travailler sur ça.
It's clear that projects today are different from projects 50 years ago or 10 years ago. I think the important thing, and what we stress in our university, is that there's no right solution. There are many different solutions based on all the considerations that one has to prioritize. Obviously, a solution that favors one aspect of a problem will be different from one that favors another aspect of a problem. It's the realization, I think, that there are many more people involved in developing solutions now than there were 50 years ago, and that probably the most appropriate way to attack a problem is to involve all of those who have a stake in the project, who are stakeholders. We're very much concerned about social equity, about environmental justice, about food security, about things that are contemporary to climate change. There are problems of today that really didn't exist 10 years ago or 50 years ago. So I think we have to understand, like you said, that it's a process of collaboration, and that no one person can manage the whole project. It becomes incumbent for those of us in practice and teaching to expose students to many different ways of thinking about a problem, and to instill in them that the profession is a practice of collaboration, not of an individual direction.
Okay, I would start, let's say, from top to down. We started a few years ago to deal with these problems you asked, Martin, and the most easy level to introduce such issues is the PhD level, in my opinion, because that is the most flexible one, being a few PhD candidates there, a few dozens of PhD candidates, and each one having a relatively flexible program. So we started from top, and at the moment, from our 50 PhD students, over 40, they have some topics related to this question. Afterwards, of course, we used to build up cooperations with local municipalities, and coming from politics, as you know, the local municipalities are fighting strongly with such problems day by day, and they are coming to the university and offering possibilities to participate on some real projects with the students till concept level. And most of those projects are dealing with green infrastructures, ecological sustainability, social equity, as we heard, ecosystem services, new possibilities of plant use, even researchers related to new tree species which can be introduced in the cities. And as a result, we already created a few subjects which directly are dealing with those problems. From other hand, we try to motivate our colleagues to include in each subject such kind of principles and approaches. And of course, this is depending from individuals. Thank you.
Merci. Une autre question? Peut-être une dernière? Ah, il y en a deux. Je vais être brève et puis on va demander une réponse aussi brève.
Merci. Yes, I was very interested by your presentations, and we saw always that the profession of landscape architecture proposed technological solutions, but also with an artistic dimension, I can say. And this was very important in the presentations of all of you, and how to keep this dimension and explain perhaps to other professions that this is an important component of this profession.
For all of you, yes.
C'est pour tout le monde, peut-être. Voilà, c'est, à mon avis, c'est la profession d'architecte paysagiste ou paysagiste concepteur. Il est créé pour là parce que écologue, il peut travailler sur les problèmes écologiques, ingénieur sur les problèmes de construction, mais tout marié et encore donner le point artistique, c'est le rôle d'architecte paysagiste. Et c'est ne doit être qu'une exception, il doit gérer les problèmes qui concernent la vie, la nature vivante, tout ça, et pour tout, finalement, donner expression artistique. C'est notre rôle, quoi.
In our curriculum, we stress the artistic development in the early years in basic composition, color, line theory, etc. And we reinforce it throughout the curriculum so that it begins in the early years but is reinforced later with comments and observations about how landscape architecture is not just a scientific approach, but it's also an artistic approach.
Well, this is a big question, the one about art and science. But I think they are the basis of our disciplines. Bourlemar said that landscape is a fact of art and science, and also Maria Teresa Parpaiolo, so we are talking about early the last century. And I think that art is the way in which we communicate, we affirm, and we understand better the values we are trying to fight for, also by using technologies and science. So there is a link which cannot be divided in any way, and that's what we are trying to do. And art is not just something which is connected to shapes or to aesthetic in a superficial way. It's something which is in deep connection with the empathy we are trying to feed, to explore the world around us. It's the way in which we feel part of the world around us. In this way, we think it's very, very important. And we are trying to help our students. That's why in our PhD program, we also have some teachers of contemporary art. I think we are very, very important.
So gardens are created by humans, and gardens are reflections of the paradise, as we know. So have to be beautiful. This is the answer.
Non, mais c'était pas vraiment une question, mais j'ai peur de rallonger alors que tout le monde est. Non, c'était juste plutôt une réflexion. Voilà. Moi, je pense que cette question de l'adaptation de nos métiers aux enjeux de la transition n'est pas instrumentale. Le propos n'est pas de rajouter des connaissances, même si évidemment c'est important que les étudiants, je pense, soient davantage formés en écologie, en sylviculture. Enfin, il y a plein de connaissances qu'il faudrait sans doute introduire davantage dans les programmes. Mais il me semble qu'on est peut-être à un moment de l'histoire de nos formations où nous devrions dire plus nettement que ce qui se trouve au cœur du projet de paysage, c'est le paysage. C'est-à-dire que la dimension sur laquelle nous travaillons, c'est celle de ce qui est déjà là. Le paysage, c'est ce qui préexiste à l'intervention du concepteur. Et il me semble que l'esprit du projet de paysage, c'est en quelque sorte de faire en sorte qu'on change le moins possible ce paysage. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a, je pense, dans l'ADN même du projet de paysage, quelque chose qui rencontre les problématiques, les enjeux de ce qu'on appelle la décroissance, par exemple. Et je pense que cette connexion entre décroissance et projet de paysage devrait être affirmée comme étant substantielle, consubstantielle à ce que nous faisons. Voilà, ça traverse toute notre histoire. Voilà, donc je suis un peu peiné parfois quand j'ai l'impression qu'on se gratte la tête en se demandant comment est-ce qu'on va réussir à intégrer cette dimension de la transition écologique dans l'enseignement du paysage, alors qu'il me semble que cette intégration, elle est déjà de fait. Voilà. Par contre, peut-être qu'on a oublié de le dire. Voilà. Je suis Denis Delbar, je suis paysagiste et enseignant à l'école du paysage de Lille.
Denis Delbar, landscape architect and professor at the school in Lille. And to translate as best I can, he feels that the question of how do we add more to the program in terms of climate change and ecology, and how do we add more and more knowledge to the program is maybe misplaced. That there are certain fields that he feels are already part of the curriculum that we need to reaffirm, like ecology or forest management, but that the landscape itself should be at the heart of the question, instead of trying to add more interdisciplinarity to reaffirm the identity of landscape architecture itself. And he makes a fairly radical statement that we should be working with the landscape which is already existing and do the least possible in terms of transformation of the space. And that for him, it's in the DNA of landscape architecture itself that we are already at the forefront of ecological transition, and that it's a question of communication, of letting other people know that that's what we're capable of doing, and also that. Oui, décroissance. Okay, décroissance is a concept that you have in French, with the idea that instead of having a continual growth of the economy, that we should be looking towards a decline. And so we should be affirming landscape architecture's position within the voluntary decline.
Merci.
Degrowth.
Nous concluons la séance. Avant de quitter le micro, je souhaitais quand même, donc je transforme la question que j'ai formulée en réflexion. en prenant la même démarche que Denis. C'est intéressant parce qu'à un moment donné, Leigh, vous avez parlé de l'enthousiasme, encouragement, with Robert Rice, transmettre ses connaissances, teaching. Et il me semble qu'il met en avant un des acteurs principaux de cet enseignement du paysage, c'est-à-dire l'étudiant. Et il serait intéressant aussi un jour de discuter, qu'ils prennent la parole et de discuter aussi ce qui devient cet enseignement et comment cet apprentissage se construit. Qu'est-ce qu'ils en font les uns les autres, les étudiants, et quelle est la démarche pédagogique qu'on adopte dans chaque pays peut-être. C'est une réflexion, une discussion qui peut continuer autour d'un café. Et donc je vous remercie. On est un peu en retard, mais on avait commencé déjà un peu en retard, donc on a le temps de prendre un café, une dizaine de minutes, pas plus, pour ne pas retarder la séance qui va suivre. Et encore merci, et puis bonne pause, et on continue la discussion.